Now, I'm taking for granted you can see my email from this morning. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. So, as it says, today, day 26, we're going to go over chapter 8. And no, it's not how to, it's how to transfer data from controllers. Plus, we're going to learn about a couple other things in here that are new. Okay. So, your chapter 7 written test, etc., was due last Sunday. I have not graded those yet. And your chapters 6 and 7 stuff will be due. That hands-on test 3 will be due tomorrow by midnight. All right, so let's get started. Now, hopefully you found most of the stuff in the book so far fairly straightforward. I mean, I'm not saying it's always been easy to do, but hopefully what we've been doing has been fairly straightforward. Now, some of the stuff that we've been discussing earlier in the book, we will go over in this chapter. But as it says in that last sentence, it'll also present new ways, all right? So other new ways, basically, of getting information from a controller to a view or passing information from one controller to another controller. All right, so like I said, that's what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that you're going to see in here that is going to be new is the concept of something that's called a view model. All right, so most of the stuff, like it shows here, for about the first half of the chapter or so, is going to be on stuff we've already talked about. Now, they will expand upon the view data and the view bag. They'll talk about the differences between them. They'll talk about why you might want to use them. They'll talk about why you might not want to use them. Then after that, there's going to actually be 4 versions of an NFL Teams app. All right, this chapter goes over versions 1 and 2. The next chapter goes over versions 3 and 4. Now, in this chapter, what they'll do is they will allow you in version 2 of this app, this NFL Teams app, that if you click a button, you're going to add whatever that team is to your list of favorite teams. Now, with that said, it's not really doing that. All right. What it's going to do in this chapter is it's going to use temp data, which is something we have not talked about yet. And it's going to basically present a message on your screen that says, for example, the Green Bay Packers have been added to your favorites, something along those lines. But it doesn't physically add them. In order to physically add them, you have to use sessions, which we've talked about in other classes. You've, I'm sure, had with Evan, etc. Sessions and cookies are the subject of chapter 9, the next chapter that we go over. So what we're going to do now is kind of going to be faux pas. And what I mean is we're going to act like we're doing something, but we're really not doing it. All right, that's the first half of the chapter. Then in the second half, all right, we're going to get into the concept of actually using what are typically referred to as view models. All right, and what's the difference between a view and a view model? All right, well, that's what this whole thing is. The whole part of this chapter is going to be about. All right, now it says 4 pages, but it's more than that. Then we talk about how to redirect a request. And you'll notice in there, they also talk about this post redirect get pattern, which is typically called PRG. You may have seen this, heard about this, maybe even done this yourselves, where you've got a form up on a screen. All right, you fill something out and you click a submit button. Now it's been 30 seconds to a minute. And if you're not an IT student, if you're a typical customer, you think either something's not working or, oh, maybe I forgot to press that submit button. I thought I did, but maybe I didn't. So you press it again. All right. And this is how to get over that so that you're not sending 2 post requests. So that's what that'll be about. And then, like I said, we'll talk about temp data, and that will lead into the Teams app number 2. These two apps are going to look virtually identical to one another. The difference between them is the NFL Teams 2.0 app is going to utilize some stuff that is in between where this one ended here on 304 and where this began on 306. All right, so with that said, let's get to it. All right. So the first thing they talk about it here, as you can see, is it says the apps that you've been using so far in this book have been set up in a certain way. You transfer data from a controller to a view by passing a model object to a view method. And that's pretty much what we've been doing from day one. As it says, this method returns a view result object, which is a type of action result. All right. So it says now we're going to talk about how you can, another way that you can transfer data from a controller to a view. And what we'll get to fairly quickly is also how to go and do this from a controller to another controller. All right. Okay. Now the figure on the next page that we're going to see in just a moment, all right, it presents a kind of a hierarchy of how this whole thing works. And under the figure, there's a table. Now, some of the stuff that's in the table you've already seen. So let's just go there and we'll come back if we need to. So this is pretty much what we've been working with. And virtually everything that we've done so far has been a view result. We've done a little bit of redirect where we've redirected back to a home page. We've done nothing with a JSON result. We've done nothing with a file result. But you'll notice all of them are children of action result, which is a child of iAction result. So again, with these action types, the ones that we have pretty much talked about so far have been the first two. The view result, and you can read that yourself, and the redirect result. All right, I guess we've looked at the redirect to action as well, but we have not looked at JSON result. We have not looked at file result. We have not looked at status code result or content result or empty result. We've looked at content where we've sent plain view to the, plain text to the browser. All right. And I don't even think we've done anything with empty. But if we look at those, the bottom half, let's say, you'll notice that the first thing they talk about in here is they talk about serializing an object to JSON and then sending it to a browser when it can be deserialized. I kind of look at it this way, and I might have even used this kind of analogy to you before. But imagine that you've got a house, and what you want to do is you want to move the house from point A to point B, and the house is made out of bricks, and you're able to literally remove every brick. So rather than having a house, you've got this humongous pile of bricks. Well, that's serializing the house. Then you get to where you want to put the new house and you put it back together again. And that's deserializing. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a later chapter. But as it says, you can also work with file results and status code results. We'll talk a little bit about status codes later in the chapter as well. This, they even mentioned, is an incomplete list. And if you go out to here, all right, that's a full list. I'm not going to do that. You can if you're so inclined. But if we look here on the bottom, within a controller, an action type can return any type of action result. All right. So it can return a lot of different types of result object, as mentioned right here. All right. As far as actually going out and returning these action results, some of this stuff, again, you've looked at already. We turn the page and take a quick look. We've done view, we've done redirect, and we've done redirect to action, I believe. All right. We have not done file or JSON. That'll either be for another time if we do it at all. Okay. But most of these methods also, as it shows in this second thing right here, the second table, have multiple overloads. So what they're saying right there, if you look, the view method is overloaded 4 times. So you can give it 4 different parameters or no parameter at all, I guess 3 different parameters. All right, and one of them has got 2 parameters in it, and the other one has no parameters at all. You may have noticed this already. You may not have. I don't know. But ever since back in the day of AWD 1100, when we were actually going over C#, when you put certain methods out, if you put your mouse over that method, it would come back and say that that method was overloaded. And it would give you like a little thing that would say overload, and there'd be a little drop down list there or a little arrow. And if you'd click it, it would show a drop down list of all the overloads that are in here. All right. Now, when Visual Studio generates these different types of action methods, it uses a return type of iActionResult. We've already talked about that. Okay. It's considered, what we've been doing so far has been the generic way of doing things. What's considered the more proper way of doing things is to be more specific as far as the return type that you're giving it, rather than just saying like a return view, which we've been doing often. All right. What this usually does is it improves performance. So that means that the program should run faster. Now, with the stuff we're doing, you're not really going to be able to tell anyway. All right. But if you look here, you can see, as it says, we've cast here. All right. And that's pretty much what they're talking about in here. I'm not going to read these to you. All right. Now, we've discussed already view data. I'm sorry, well, view bag really. And we haven't really looked much at view data, although we've used it a few times. All right. The biggest difference between view data and view bag is view data works with basically what are referred to as key value pairs. So there's typically a little bit more work that you have to do when you work with view data. All right. It's considered, it's not as generic, so it's more specific. All right. But with both of these, you probably have noticed this already, and maybe I've even said it already. I don't know. But with both view data and view bag, all right, with both of them, you don't get IntelliSense. The reason that that's important is if you have actual errors in your code syntactically with the way you're using view data and view bag, most of the time, the system won't catch it until you run the program. All right. And again, that's the biggest downfall of using either view data or using view bag. All right. So they mention a couple things in here. It says the view data property is shared with the associated view. The view data dictionary class has some properties that you can use as well. All right. And again, I mentioned this is key value, and you can see those are the 3 biggest properties that you'd use most often. Count, if you want a number of key value pairs you have, keys to grab the keys, values to grab the values. Now they give an example here. I'm not going to say it's a good example or a bad one, but it does go through what you're doing here. So notice what they have, and you're able to say at viewData.count in here, even before you've come in. Well, it's assuming rather that you've come in and you've set this already. So somewhere in here, like I said, you have come in and you have set, I guess, up here. Okay. But notice what you have. It's a key value pair. So the key is book, the value is Alice in Wonderland. The key is price, the value is $9.99. Now, when we've been using view bag, we don't have this because view bag has just been one thing or a collection of one thing. So what this does more so than view bag is it does make your code at least somewhat more self-documenting. So you can notice if you look in here, there's two things. And again, if we wanted both, they've got the key, then the value. All right. So pretty much this, you know, doesn't, it looks pretty much the way you'd expect it to look, is what I'm saying. All right. Now, when you work with this stuff too, notice it says razor code that casts a view data object to the double type. This is something you really don't have to do when you are working with view bag. All right. The view data property, though, it's of the view data dictionary type. So again, it's a collection of key value pairs. So if you want to work with it in code, you have to cast the value to its right data type. Now, we didn't have to do it above because basically we're using everything in there like a string. All right. But if we actually want to work with it as it says there with the price and be able to work with that as though it is a price. Now you'll notice in there they've cast it to a double. We could just as easily have gone in and cast it to a decimal. Oh, the other thing too is when you do this, and you see this on the bottom, especially in here, because normally when you do this casting, you're going to be casting it to numeric types. So you end up using the question mark in here a lot. If you remember, hopefully you remember that question mark is the null conditional operator. All right. So if the value is null, the method basically isn't going to be executed. All right. So this can basically, it prevents you from getting your null reference kind of exceptions. And I don't know about you, but I've gotten my share. All right. But again, like view bag, you do not get the IntelliSense with this, but it is considered kind of a cleaner way because you have to check for things that you don't necessarily have to check for when you're working with view bag. All right. So as it says there, the view bag uses C#'s dynamic type. So as it says, you can add properties to it and .NET determines their value at runtime. So in other words, you've got a little bit more developer control using view data, whereas you're giving up some developer control to the system using view bag. All right. Now, they do mention here, as it says, under the hood, the view bag property stores its data in a view data dictionary. All right. So in other words, it's kind of doing the same thing, but again, you don't have to do as much work with it. And they mention at the end of this paragraph that view bag is sometimes considered an alias for view data. And I'm not going to lie to you. If it's up to me, if I know that I can use view data, I'll use it because it's easier to use. And as they mentioned, since it's dynamically typed, you don't need to cast. And you don't need to cast because the system figures out based on context what the variable type is. But they do mention, though, that it is still considered a good idea to check for something being null or not null. All right. Much of the work that we've done this semester, and we believe it or not, and I don't know if you do, but we've done quite a bit. We're almost 300 pages into this book. But most of the time, when we run our programs, at least me, I can't speak for anybody else, but you are kind of assuming everything's going to work. In other words, all right, we're assuming that if we're adding new information into a field, all right, that it's going to be the right type. Now we put checks in there, we do that kind of stuff, but by and large, all right, we're probably not doing as much actual testing as you would do if you were a professional programmer. Now, one thing that they're going to discuss much later in the book, all right, much later in the book, they're going to discuss different kinds of testing methods, all right? And we'll get into it at that time. In the past, we haven't always had enough time to go over that, and I think that's a disservice to the students. I'm not real hip on how to use it, but I'd like to go over it before we get to that point and do a little bit of work with it so you can say that you've at least been exposed to it. So as they mentioned here, and I said this to you, in general, ViewBag is easier to work with than ViewData. So as it says, you should use it in most scenarios. Now, with that said, that's the author's opinion. But as they say here, there are a few scenarios where it makes sense to use ViewData. For example, as it says, if you need to use names for your keys that aren't valid in C#, all right, why wouldn't they be valid? Because, I don't know, they could have weird characters in them or whatever, all right? You may be able to access them using the ViewData dictionary. In addition, as it says, if you use Visual Studio to generate code, it may use ViewData rather than using ViewBag. All right. The disadvantage is what I mentioned before. It doesn't provide compile time checking. The reason it doesn't is with no IntelliSense, there's no way for the system to know in advance whether something you put in is valid or is invalid typically until you run the program. All right. So again, they give some examples here. So this is the same kind of example they used before in the previous page, but this is using ViewBag rather than using ViewData. All right. Now, not the greatest of analogies and not the worst of analogies, but if you look at this, you may or may not be aware of this, but when you look at this and you are filling these things out, what am I looking for here? Let's see. When you do something like this and you say ViewData, bracket, double quote, something, bracket, etc., as opposed to if you do it like this with the dot, all right, it's kind of like when you are working in JavaScript. And most of the time when you're working with JavaScript and you are working with properties in JavaScript or the equivalent of properties, you can do it the same kind of thing. You can do it either way. You can either, have the name of your object, and then in brackets and in double quotes, you can have the name of your property and set it equal to something, or you can have the name of your object dot the name of your property, like they show right here. All right. To me, one of the reasons that this is more popular doing it this way, all right, with ViewBag is it just seems more natural to look at it this way. All right. And I don't know if you agree or disagree with that. But again, like I said, that's just my feeling. All right. And notice that when you do that, you can still use the ViewData methods because, again, ViewBag, as already mentioned, is kind of an alias for ViewData. All right. I don't think there's anything in here we haven't talked about. I mentioned that. I guess spaces would be an even better example than weird characters. Okay. All right. So here is going to be the first instance of this Teams app. And what I'd like to do is before we start going over it even a little, before we start going over it even a little bit, is I'd like to actually bring the program up on the screen and have us take a quick look at the program. All right. And you're going to notice there's going to be some things that are going to be very similar to what we've looked at before. And of course, there'll be some things that'll be different. But I grabbed most of this stuff at the beginning of class here. I think this is the one, Chapter 8A, NFL teams. I believe this is the right one. Now, I don't know, and I'm not speaking specifically to you, Grant, but I don't know with anybody in here, if you are NFL fans or not NFL fans. You don't have to be a football fan to be able to understand this program. It really and truly is not difficult. So when we look at it, you look in here, we've got models. Let's start there because that's always a good place to start. All right. So when you look at the National Football League, there are two conferences. There is a National Football Conference, the NFC, and there is an American Football Conference, the AFC. So if you look, this is how we're showing them in here. Pretty simple stuff. You've got a conference ID, which notice it's a string, all right? And you've got a name or a conference name, all right? So that's pretty simple. Then each conference consists of divisions. So again, you'll notice again, our ID is a string. So we've got a division ID and a division name. I think it's typically like north, south, central, or something. I don't know if it's north, south, east, west. I don't remember. I don't care. All right. And then based on that, each division has four, or I think it's about four teams in it. So we had our conferences. All right. Then we have our divisions, and then we have our teams. All right. And as you might guess, as we're going down, this is getting more specific. Now you'll notice something if you look at it here. Two things. All right. First of all, again, our ID is a string. So the ID all the way along here has been string. One of the reasons for setting it up like that is we are again going to be using one of our list controls where we're going to default a lot of stuff to all. All right. And that's one of the reasons our IDs are set up as strings. Okay. The other thing to notice in here, if you look, is we don't have any foreign keys. And we don't have any foreign keys in here because we're not allowing the user to change any data. We still have navigation properties. So we're still bringing in conference and division as navigation properties. But again, since in here, the only part of CRUD we're doing is read, we don't need primary keys. All right. So, I mean, that's that. And you'll notice, yeah, there's a string that's going to hold the logo image. If we go over to the context here, it's going to look very similar to the types of context we've done before. All right. So we come in here, we've got this, etc. We do our DB sets for each one of these. All right. We've got our on model create. Then again, we've got the two conferences. Each conference, I guess it is north, south, east, and west, has four divisions. And then we've got our names. All right. Or our teams. Okay. And you see how they've set it up here. Okay. With either 2 characters or 3 characters for the ID, the name, the conference they're in, the division they're in that conference. And then notice we have ping files that have got those logos, which says that in our www root, we better have an images in there, and it's got all 32. So if I just grab Cleveland, for example, there it is. All right. And that's pretty much the way that it's going to look then. Okay. So what I'm saying is this isn't, so far at least, not really all that different from what we've done before. And you could almost make that it's going to end up being easier. So when we look at the controllers in here, we've got a home controller. And if we go down to our views under home, notice there's just an index. There's not an add and there's not a delete because we're not providing create, update, or delete the CUD of CRUD. We're not providing those capabilities. So if we go in here to our home controller, all right, very similar to stuff we've been doing in the past, but if you look, you may or may not been able to tell because I went through it fast, but all we have in here is an index. Yes, we do come in and we set up our context variable. Yes, we do pass it in our controller, but as far as the view that's in here, all right, notice what we have. It is assuming, or I shouldn't say assuming, it is defaulting the active conference to all. It is defaulting the active division to all. It is doing that so that when we first bring up the program, and we'll run it in a second, but when we first bring it up, one of those things in there is going to be all, and that's going to be the one that's highlighted, and that's going to be basically show us all 32 team logos at one time. Then if we click the thing there that says NFC, all right, then what? It's going to cut it in half, or AFC, it'll cut it in half. Then if we choose a division, it'll cut it down to 4, that kind of an idea. So you'll notice in here what we're doing is we're using the view bag to hold, as it says, whatever conference we selected, whatever division we've selected. What you're going to notice when we get to the second part of this chapter, all right, when we get to it, is we're going to get rid of these. We're not going to use view bag, all right? We're going to use something new that's called view model. So we're going to end up creating 1 or 2 more classes in our model class, all right? And we'll go over that in just a bit. Okay, so as it says, and what I do like about the way that we wrote this program is it's fairly well documented. Get the list of conferences and the list of divisions from the database. So first we're querying the database to give us the conferences. All right, it'll give us those 2. Then we're querying it again to give us the divisions. And really there's 8 of them, 4 for each conference. All right, then as it says, insert the default all in front of each list. And again, we're able to do that because of the way that this is set up here. All right. All right. Then again, notice up here we did our active conference and our active division. And here we're storing those lists also in view bags. All right. This is not a terrible way to do this. This is the way we've been doing it for several chapters. But if we were working on a real-time application, all right, the use of view bag can slow down program execution time. All right. So as it says in there, get teams, filter by conference and division. And you'll notice we're using Lambda expressions in there. And you'll notice that there are the context.teams that we're calling query. What is that? All right. Again, we are going through and we're basically saying, okay, now you have chosen something more specific. So if the active conference isn't all, we have to check to see if you've chosen NFC or AFC. If the active division isn't all, we have to see if you've chosen the North Division, the South Division, the East Division, or the West Division. All right. And the only other thing that's worth mentioning in here is the view. All right. And even that isn't that different from what we've done before, other than, all right, notice what we have in here. All right, we've got a check in here. So we're checking to see whether or not we have chosen, all right, whether or not we have chosen an active conference or an active division. All right, but other than that, you'll notice now there's 2 for each loops. All right, why? Because there's 2 different conferences and each conference has its own divisions. All right, so you can see everything that's in here. All right, and then finally, this is going to fill up our logos. So if we run this, and my guess is that most of you already know where I'm going with this. Hopefully it'll come up sooner and not later. All right. So it should come up and it should show 32 logos. And the reason that it should come up and show those, come on, is that there are 32 teams and it's defaulting. Well, oh, I probably don't have the database. Okay. All right. I don't even think I have to do a migration here. I think, let's see. Let's view Server Object Explorer. I thought I had an NFL Teams in here, but maybe I don't. NFL Teams. All right, since I have that, it should be set up the same, I think, as what's in there. So I'm going to try to not add a migration. I'm going to see if I can just update the database. If I get an error, then so be it. Well, didn't like that. It says it already exists, use a different name. Okay, I didn't think it would mind, but it does. So I'm very quickly going to come in here and remove this. Yeah, it doesn't like it because this is up and running. So all right. Still might not allow me to. Cannot drop it because it does not exist or you do not have permission. Isn't that nice? All right. I want this to work and I want to quickly go over it. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to go into my app settings.json right here, and I'm going to change the name to NFL Teams 2. Just make that one change. I think that's all I'll probably have to change. And then let's do an add migration. And I'm just going to call it NFL Teams 2. You guys shouldn't come up with or have any errors like this. You probably don't have an NFL Teams database. So you should be able to just do your add migration if you need to and your update database. All right, so let's see if we can now do an update database. Shouldn't get an error here. Again, no red is always a good thing. And I didn't see any in there, so I should now be able to go in, refresh, and I should have an NFL Teams 2 in here. And to make it easier for me later, oh, it did remove now my NFL Teams. Probably could rename that, but I'm not going to. All right, so now if I close this and I run it, all right, there's our 32 right there. All right. And again, it's defaulting to all and all. If I click this one, it should go to 16, and it does. If I click this one, it goes to 16, the other 16, and it does. All right, once I go to a division, I can go to to a conference. I can go to any division, and then it should only be showing me 4. All right, and that should make sense. Right now, these aren't clickable images, nothing is happening. So of course I'd want to say that that's my favorite team, but if I click on it, nothing's happening. Something will when we get to the next version of this. All right, but again, I think at least, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that everything we've done in here so far, all right, yes, there've been a couple things, setting these up with our defaults, etc., and doing a little bit more work with ViewBag than we've done. but I think anybody in this class would be able to build what we've done in here thus far. All right, really without much trouble. Now, they mentioned, yeah, you need to know a little bit about the NFL. Well, we already went over that. All right. So if we look in here again, there's a little bit about it. And as I already mentioned, what happens when you click the buttons, etc. All right. So as it says, the next thing shows the model layer. All right. Now, notice what it says here. Before moving on, remember that nullable references are enabled by default. Bottom line is this. What they do in this particular chapter, and I didn't show you it, but we'll look at it in here, is when you have strings, any field that's in there that's a string, they initialized to string.empty. And anytime they're using a navigation property, they use the question mark with it. All right. So again, you'll see that when you look in here, string empty, string empty, string empty, etc. These, I thought they used the question mark. They didn't. They set it to no. All right. So in other words, there will always be some kind of default value. All right. Whether it's conference or whether it's division or whether it's team. All right. The context really has nothing in it that's new. We did look at it quickly. Again, there are 3 different model classes in it, which will result in 3 different tables. All right. But we looked at the data, etc. All right. Not really anything else new in there. Next, as they talk about the home controller, as I've mentioned. All right. I think that by and large, it very much pairs up with the kind of home controllers we've been writing. All right. So as it says, when the program starts, it automatically creates a team context object, passes it to the constructor, and stores it in that private property. What we've been doing all along. They call this team context. All right. So there's nothing new there. Again, the home controller has just an index method that handles every. All right, sorry, my internet's a little flaky. All right, try that again. All right, so hopefully I'm back and you didn't lose too much or lose anything. All right, so as it says, to make it clear, this code specifies view result as the return type, not an action result or an IAction result. All right, as it says here, the compiler doesn't need to determine the, which again can make the program run faster. We already looked at the fact that each one of these, all right, each one of these are the IDs for the conference or the division, and in our program, in our home controller, they each have a default value of all. All right, so again, if you don't select it, you get anything special, you get all 32 teams. Okay, now notice what they say here. Since this action accepts 2 parameters, it doesn't work well with the default route. What does that mean? That means we better go into our program.cs. And again, this is more specific than this one. We always put our default last, but some of it looks the same. Some of it looks different. All right. But the point is in here again, the conference and the division. That's what they're talking about, having the 2 different parameters being passed in. All right. And I mean, the rest of it is just very descriptive in nature. When the index method within it, it says it starts by creating 2 view-based properties. One thing that I have found when I've done a little bit of coding outside of the classroom is a lot of times when I don't know how to do something, or I'm like, geez, I'll have to look that up. I'll just throw it into a view bank for right now. And that's considered, again, pardon my French, but kind of a piss poor way of doing things. All right, because it's not even so much that you don't get the IntelliSense. All right, it's not even so much that you won't find that you might have an error until you run it, but it's just, it's kind of a kludgy way of doing things, for lack of better words. All right. So as it says, it's got the active conf and the active div. It stores these parameters, all right, in these properties. This is how, as it says, the controller can transfer the conference and the division to the view. So as you get more specific and you click something other than all right. So as mentioned, after storing those, it retrieves the conferences and the divisions, all right, from the database rather, and it stores these two lists in two more view bag properties, conferences and divisions. All right, as it says, this is how it transfers those lists to the view. All right, the code gets the teams from the database. As it says, it starts by building a query expression, and it has to know. There's not that much work to do if all has been, if the default has been selected, but otherwise it's got to find whatever it is it's looking for. All right. Now, maybe that wasn't the greatest of explanations, but hopefully at least, looking at this, it makes some sense to you. I just brought it up in the actual program itself because, in my opinion, sometimes when you see something run, it makes a little bit more sense than when you see it in here in a book and I just say, well, it's the stuff in mustard. All right. All right. Then we've got the layout. And as they say, pretty much it's the same kind of layout that we've been using all along. Not really big. Okay, so this would be our underscore layout.cshtml. Okay. All right. Then next, and what I'd like to do, we're on 304 or so, and I'd like this to get up to about, no, we're not going to get that far. All right, no, I don't want to go that far. We'll go till about 1 o'clock, and then we'll take a break. How's that? All right. In fact, maybe we'll just finish up this section and we'll take a little early break. Start talking about his view models, and that'll eventually get us into the second iteration of this. All right. Now, they mention here when they show this, all right, this is important. It's an IEnumerable because we're not really sure what we're getting back. All right. In other words, does the system, is it going to show us one thing? Is it going to show us one logo? Is it going to show us 4 logos? Is it going to show us 16 logos? Or is it going to show us 32 logos? Hence the need for the IEnumerable in there because we're not sure exactly what it is. All right. And notice they even come in here and they've got a ternary operator. All right. And basically what they're trying to do is to say, did we select something other than all? And if we did, it's going to be here. All right. And that's going to be active. Otherwise, there's nothing. We haven't selected anything. And again, if we back up a little, it's kind of explained in here, probably better than I just did it. But if we look, as it says, the Razor code block starts with a statement that assigns the value NFL teams to the view data dictionary with a key of title. So it's the first time you're actually seeing view data in action, so to speak, other than if you've ever used view data to set a title. All right. And if you've done that, even in the past, we've always said view data. And then in brackets, we've had like double quote, title, double quote, equals something. So again, that's another example of the key and the value. All right. And it says in here, this is the same thing, the same value that the layout retrieves from the view bag to prove that you can use view bag and view data interchangeably because again, view bag is just an alias for view data. All right. Then it says it comes in here and it defines a helper method named active. All right. So what does that mean? Just what we said. All right. It's saying, have you selected basically something other than the all that comes up by default at the beginning? All right. I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm going through it enough where it at least makes some sense to everybody. All right. Let's start on this and then we'll take a break. Okay. So the next thing that's in here are view models. View models are going to be something new that get added to model. This is one case where, you know, I think it was back in Mr. Smith wrote the test for chapter 1 that you guys did, the one on the tip, whatever it was, I don't know, whatever you did for your first test. All right. And I mean, the reason that I'm telling you that is he, I think, asked you to put the word model in there in at the end of your models. Okay. You don't have to do that. However, it is considered the norm to put view model on the end of any view model that you create. And it's considered the norm. It's considered the norm because of the fact that if you didn't put that in there, really you'd have no way of differentiating between a view and a view model. All right. So again, I'm going to expect that you follow what I don't know, which is kind of the unwritten standard, and that you do it that way. All right. So as it says, so far, we've used the view method to transfer one entity object or a collection to a view. You know that. All right. So for instance, if we've done our details or our list, I should say our list, we transferred the entire list to the view. If we've done our add, edit, or our delete, we have transferred a single object to the view. All right. Sometimes, as it says, the data needed by a view doesn't match the data in the entity model. And as a for instance, what they're saying here is, wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to monkey with view bag or view data, all right, to worry about conference and division objects? That's how we did it in the first version of this, as it says. All right, we use the view bag to transfer other data to the view. I've already mentioned that the IntelliSense doesn't work and the compiler doesn't warn you of errors. That may be a big thing, it may not. So what they'll have here in version 2 of the NFL app here is they're going to use a view model. Notice the definition here. The view model is a C# class. It holds all the data that a specific model requires. Again, by default, it ends with a suffix of view model, and I'd like you to do that. So if we look here, all right, and we look at what's in here, right, let's concentrate for now on these things all the way up to here. All right, so the first half or 2/3. All right, notice what we're passing in. That active conference that we set before and that active division that we set before. And then notice what we're passing in. A list of all the teams, a list of all the conferences, a list of all of the divisions. So rather than being stuck with view bag everywhere, we're literally passing in more of what we need. Then down on the bottom there, what they're mentioning is you can also come in here and you can write individual methods. These methods that you write, they are views. The reason I'm saying that, I should say they're view methods, all right? View model methods, whatever you want to call them, they should never perform any actual executable type of code because the models aren't supposed to do that. All this is doing is it's checking, as it says, to see what's active. Is it all? Is it NFC all? Is it NFC South, for example? Something like that. That's what this is doing. So again, if I back up again and we go take a look in here. Okay. So as it says, the code presents the team view model class. The first two properties as it says, are set to the default values of all. Then the next is the collection of team objects. Then we get a collection of conference objects. Then we get a collection of division objects, because all of them are working in unison in what we're trying to do here. Now, the reason that they say here that they're lightweight classes is, again, they are not designed to perform any kind of executable operations. You can turn around and say, well, wait a minute, we just made that check in there. Yeah, but I consider an executable operation something that can, at least conceivably, something that can go in and change the data in a database. That's not what these are about. All right. And as they say there, the Teams view model provides check active CONF and check active DIV to determine the active link. That's all it's doing. Again, notice that's acceptable because this logic only impacts how the view is displayed. But there's really no, other than that, there's no logic in it. All right. So again, just to go over it one more time, because this is new. All right. So as they say, a view model is a regular C# class. All right. By convention, it has view model on the end. It's not required, but I'm going to ask that you do that in any view model that you create. Most of them, as it says, provide data and do nothing else, but they can also contain simple methods like the ones that were shown above here. All right. So rather than going through this updated stuff, which we will do in just a minute, it is 102. Let's take till 115, and we'll come back then and we'll finish up the chapter. I will be right back. We'll start up in just 1 second. Want to make sure this works first.
All right, I'm here.
Okey doke. All right, so let me knock that down, refresh, and make sure I should now have an NFL Teams and my NFL Teams 2. I should have both of them. I don't think I refreshed. Otherwise, I didn't change the doggone name. I did not. So I changed it over here. Huh. I should have an NFL Teams here and it's not showing it. That's a little weird.
It's right under Movies DB.
Oh, you're right. I'm looking for, yeah, the capitalization is different. Thank you. All right, let's go back into this. I will tell you too, just so you know, this is the plan right now. We're going to finish this between now and 2 o'clock. I don't think there'll be any problem with that. Then we're going to jump right over to the projects and we're going to build this trip log. We'll see how much of it we can get done today, which will probably be most of it. All right, but I'm not sure. Whatever we don't finish, if there is anything, because there's a part 1 and a part 2. All right, then we'll finish tomorrow. Then tomorrow we're going to go into chapter 9. I don't think I'm going to do this with you. I don't know if you've ever played the game Pig or not, but when we did this last semester, we did it together, and pardon my French, but it was a pain in the ass because with some people it was like it worked, but then like when you started a new game, it stopped working. So what I think I'm going to do between now and Friday is I'm going to make a separate tape of me creating Pig from scratch. And then I'll put that out there. So if you're interested in it, you can do that, but I'm not going to require students to do 9-1. All right. Okay. Let's jump back into the book then. All right. Here's where we left off. Now, what I did during the break, just so you know, is I brought up the second version of the NFL Teams app. Okay. And when you run it, oops, I don't want that. When you run it, it should look 100% the same as when we just did it. In other words, version 2 and version 1 should look the same. Nothing new there. All right, but now notice the links are clickable if I put my mouse over them. All right, and if I click there, I get this, which we didn't have before. All right, it just got a little list group here that's got, as you can see, all right, it has a little bit of information about the team that I chose. And you can return to the home page. All right, so there's a little bit more to it, but the basic interface that you see right here, other than the clickable links, is the same as what we saw before. We've got 32, we've got 16, we've got the other 16, we've got four of the other ones, etc. So that hasn't changed, is what I'm trying to show you. All right, so with that said, like I said, I want to bop back and forth between here and what's in the book and what's in the actual program. All right. So it says now that you have a view model, you can update the NFL Teams app to use it. The first example shows the updated index action of the home controller method. All right, then let's go look at that and we'll take that from the top. But again, let's look at the code. All right, so I'm going to go over to the home controller, close this and this and this. And there's our home controller. So what's changed in here? Well, from what we had in here before, all right, and I'm hoping I've got the right one up here. I think I do. Looks like, yeah, it looks like I do. All right. But if we come in here now, as it says, taking it from the top, all right, you'll notice what's missing in here is now we have no view bag. in there as we did before. All right. Now, what they're showing in here with this var data, this is considered a shortcut. All right. So when they're setting up the data, as it says, we're making a new team list view model and we're initializing this stuff. Since we are initializing multiple things in here, we can put them within curly braces so we can treat them as though they're a unit. When we do that, we have to have a comma on the end of each one except no comma before the last one, and we need a semicolon after our ending curly brace. All right, that may have made sense. That may have made absolutely no sense. All right, but I just wanted to bring that up to you here. So it says here the two parameters shown have been replaced with a parameter of type teams view model. What the heck does that mean? That means if you look at the beginning, all right, that what we're working with in here, in fact, it will be shown here, is this. We're now using our view model. All right, so we'll be using a view model as opposed to just using the view bag all over the place. And they mention here, model view controller uses model binding to assign the values of any route segments passed to the method to the properties of this object. Well, that makes a boatload of sense, right? No, is all on model binding. All right, there's a part of me that wanted to go in and I'm still not sure. I'm going to go back and reread the chapters again. I don't know if our next test will be on chapters 8 and 9 or if it will be on chapters 8, 9, and 10. All right, because there's so much in one chapter that you need to go into the next chapter. All right, one thing that you will do on your next test. All right, I'm just not for lack of better words, let's just say I'm warning you about it right now. All right, where is that? Of course, I don't have it up. But if you remember on your last test, I asked you to set up an area and populate all those files, but leave the files blank. Where are you going to fill in those files? Because I want a true admin area for each one of our tables that we have. So you'll need to be able to go in an admin area, either add, update, or delete products, vendors, employees. I forgot what else is in there, but you know what I'm talking about. So you're going to have to do that. That's going to be a lot of your next test. That's probably going to be 50 points out of your 100 because there's 5 things to update. All right. And then I'll have to figure out how to bring the rest of that in here. All right. Because I did my testing different than Evan did it last year. The test I just gave you guys, what he had people do for that test was not only did you have to create everything that I told you to create, but he had you actually implement putting in the admin section in that test. I didn't know if people would feel comfortable yet doing that or not, so I did it the way I did it. All right. So as it says, the code in the action index action is similar to the code that we looked at earlier, but rather than storing the conference and the division that's retrieved from the database in a view bag, it stores them in properties of the view model. And rather than using the active conf and active div parameters in the if statement, it uses the active, those two properties of the view model. All right. And again, what that means is you can check it right away to see whether or not you had any errors in it, and it will pick up the IntelliSense. And since you're using built-in things, so to speak, the program should execute a little faster. All right. So again, the second thing that's in there, I already started showing you this, is the updated code for the home index view. As mentioned, the statement on the top indicates we're now using a view model. All right. In fact, if you take a look in here, what you notice is if you look right here, we have 2 view models. We have a team view model. All right. and we have a team list view model. All right. If we look at the team view model, it doesn't look like there's much in there. Basically, it's just setting those properties that we talked about earlier, the active CONF and the active DIV. And again, we're using those so we're able to bring those in to our program, all right, into our home controller, all right, so we don't need the view bag, all right. And the other one, the team list view model, has got more to it, all right. So again, what? Well, notice the class, okay, it's a type team view model, all right. Then we've got teams in here. And what is it? It's returning a list of teams. Now, again, if you look, the good news is they provided at least some documentation in here. All right. But what we're going to end up using in here, again, are the things that the active CONF and the active div that we created in the other view model. All right. And that's kind of what they're going to explain in here. Again, probably better than I just did. All right. Says in this view, the Razor code block only contains the view data code that sets the title element. In other words, this version doesn't need the active helper function that you saw earlier in the chapter. The HTML, as it says, works very similarly to what we used before. The difference is that you use the properties of the view model rather than the properties of the view bag. So if you said, well, that just sounds like you're replacing view bag with view model. And yeah, that's pretty much what we're doing. Again, it says this may not seem like much, but it means you've got IntelliSense and compile time error checking, and it should run faster. All right. Another difference, as it says, is that this view uses the check active CONF and check active div helper methods from the Teams view model to mark the correct link. The code is shorter and cleaner than what was presented earlier. All right. And when you think about it, what is happening, for lack of better words, over time with all this stuff is that somebody creates a way to do something. Somebody else looks at it and says, you know, if we did this and then we did this, it would result in you having to write less code. I mean, I look at it that it's both a blessing and a curse. And what I mean is every time we're provided with like a little shortcut or whatever, it's less that we have to do. That's the blessing. But the curse is every time we do that, we're giving up some of our control as a developer and we're giving it to the software, which can, at times at least, maybe not be the best thing to do. All right. Finally, as it says, the Razor for each that loops through the list of team objects transferred from the controller now gets these from the teams property of the view model. All right. So again, we are replacing view bag and view data with view model information. You can see again, when you look in here, all the stuff that's been replaced. All right. The next thing, actually, again, I mentioned this before, and I'm going to say it again right now, and that is this is meant so that you can't keep posting and posting and posting. They give what I thought on the next page here. We'll go back in just a minute. Oh, where was it? Here. To prevent resubmission of post data, you can use this post redirect get, typically called the PRG pattern. As it says, with this pattern, a post action writes data to the server, then redirects to a get action, all right, to read the data from the server. So in other words, it's pushing you from where you've inputted something back to where it should either show what you've inputted or show you what was there before you inputted. In other words, you're being redirected back from a post to a get. And you already know this from what we've talked about earlier, and that is the fact that whereas post means that you have created, there has been some user action. Get means that you're just showing the user what's there. All right. Now, you may be aware of this, you may not be. And again, I believe everyone in this class, all of you, last summer, in fact, I'm wrong. There's probably a couple people where I'm wrong on this. But out of the 6 of you, I think 4 of you last summer, took the AWD1115 database-driven web development or web development 1 class with Node and the MERN stack, etc., with Evan. And if you did, my guess is at one time or another in there, you talked about status codes. All right. If you send a request off to the server and you ask for the status code, and if it works, you get a 200 or something in the 200s. All right. If you send something out and it's an error on your end, you get a 404 error or something in the 400s. If you send out a request and there's some kind of an error and it's not on your end, but it's on the server end, then typically you get a 500 or some kind of 504 or whatever type of error. And that's what they'll start to talk about in here. Now they get into the 300s, which are redirects. And the big difference between these two things here, all right, is this a temporary redirect or is this a permanent redirect? All right. You may have seen this kind of thing already where you go to a site and you click on something. It's kind of this one right here, for lack of better words, in my opinion, that's kind of like a detour. You're going to get where you're going, but you've got to go another way around to get there. All right. Here is, they've literally changed the way the road is set up. All right. So it's not, it basically is, this is a true redirect right here. You're saying, hey, it used to have this name, now it has this name. I've used this example before. Sorry. I gotta let that ring, I'm sorry. I've used this type of example before. Now, of course, I totally lost my train of thought, but we'll get it back. All right. Please stop ringing. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right. Again, a 302 means that it's temporary, for lack of better words. A 301 means that it's permanently been changed. Oh, I know what I was going to show you too. All right. It used to be back before Oracle, the Oracle database company bought Java. Java was its own entity. So I could come in here and type in Java, I think it was .sun.com. What should be wrong? No. All right. And now if you look up here, it redirected me. And it redirected me to oracle.com/java/technologies. That's an example right there of what they're showing in here. That's a 301. That permanently changed. There really is no java.sun.com anymore. Anything that went out to the old java.sun site now goes out to Oracle's site. All right. On the other hand, like I said, sometimes what happens is some part of the site is down or whatever. And what you might do then is, instead of coming in with a 301, you come in with a 302. All right. Now, look at this, because it's some pretty important stuff in here. It says the third table provides guidance on when to use each subtype. All right, so when to use what? So the third thing that's in here, so there's the first, there is the second, there's the third. All right, and it's the redirect result versus all these other ones. All right. Now, the reason that that can be important, the reason that this whole section in here that we're talking about is important, is you want control as a programmer where to send somebody. whether something worked or something didn't work, you want control over where they go to next. You never want to set a program up and have security holes in it where somebody else can possibly redirect you to someplace else. All right, and that's kind of what they talk about backing up a page in here. All right. It says here, you can use the local direct result to pass a URL that users should return to later. For example, a user might return to the URL after they log in. As it says, this makes sure that the return URL is part of your app and it keeps you from any of these redirection attacks. And again, if you don't think that those are big or are they're important, they are. When you hear about things like hospitals being broken into, when people getting into their websites and stuff, that's where at least a lot of this stuff takes place. All right. Most of the people who are out there trying to do things, probably 80 to 90% of people out there, they're just doing it to see if they can get into something. 10 to 20% of people are malicious. They're trying to see if they can do something, and if they can get something out of it. All right. So then it says most of these methods return action results have several overloads, and some of those are shown there too. All right. And the code will show some examples of this. So these are some of the overloads. Again, one parameter, two parameters, a different one with two different parameters, or three parameters. All right. And again, just read through this if you get the chance. That's all. All right. So this is where it's important because as it says here, this is going to explain this. Now, you're somewhat protected from this happening because typically when you go out, you get something like this. You get a message like this that says, hey, you've already gone out and submitted. Are you sure you want to do that again? All right. The problem with this is sometimes people don't even read the message. They just click continue. All right. So it may attempt to go out and repost. That's not what you want to have happen. They mention in here, it says get requests are designed to retrieve data and be idempotent, which means they're not allowed to make changes on the server. That said, can you use a get and make changes? Yes. Should you do it? Never. But sometimes people write things in a way that's not the way you should write them. So yes, you can do things. You know, it's the old idea of can you, if I really have to pound in this nail and I only have a big wrench, can I pound it in with that? Possibly. All right. So as it says, because of that, a user can resubmit a GET request multiple times by clicking the browser's refresh button. And it shouldn't affect the server because, again, it's idempotent that shouldn't make changes on the server. Posts are different. As it says, it's designed to basically write something out to the server, either something new or something changed or something that should be removed. Typically, as it says there, you don't want users to be able to resubmit a post request. So that's where this all comes in. Again, to prevent it, most browsers display a message like this. But as I said, and as it says here, if the user chooses to continue despite it, the user can submit the post request again, which typically isn't going to be what you want. All right. If I sit there and fill out something saying that I want to buy something and I click it and, I waited and I waited and I waited and the same screen is up and I click it again, what I typically am not going to want to have happen, all right, is I'm not going to want to buy two of them. All right. So as it says, to prevent this, it's common to use this PRG pattern. All right, it says this figure presents an example of code that implements the pattern. Here, the add action handles the post request that updates the server. The last statement uses the return or redirect to action to return a 302 found status code to the browser. This lets the browser know that the GET request can now be issued, and basically, for lack of better words, all right, you can look at it that it worked. It may be hung here or whatever, but it worked. The index action, as it says, handles the GET request that the browser makes in response to this. It reads the updated data from the server and passes it to the view. So as it says, as a result, if you click the refresh button again, it requests the data from the database again, and it displays it again. But it doesn't change any data on the server. In other words, if you do it again, it now is an idempotent request. The downside, as they mentioned here, is you're actually making a round trip to the server. All right, a second round trip. It's kind of like if you send something out, if you got a form that you don't perform JavaScript or HTML form validation on, and you send it out to a server, and because you didn't have any validation, something fails. Well, now it's been a waste, so you've got to send it back again to the client. It's the same type of an idea. All right. But they mention here the upside of avoiding problems caused by resubmitting typically outweigh the downside that was shown. All right. Notice if you have a post action that makes changes on the server and then returns a view, you should consider using the PRG pattern. All right. To split the action into two action methods. All right. That way you keep this from happening. And they show this in here. All right. So they have a redirect to action, index, home. That doesn't look that different from what we were doing previously. But again, what you want to do as a developer, what you are attempting to do right here is you are attempting to make it as hard as possible for somebody to screw up. All right. That's the best way that I can put it. All right. Now, next is temp data. Now, the thing about temp data to realize, okay, is it is just that. So what is going to happen in here? I'm going to move up a little bit just to show you this. So if we've got a button in here that shows a list of favorites, let's say, now what that's going to do, if I click to go and add something to my list of favorites, all right, that now it's going to give a message that's going to come up on the screen. That's exactly what's going to happen. Now, that said, technically all it's going to do is show that message on the screen. All right. In fact, I think I'm going to go back. I'll go back to right where we were in just a minute. But they show a picture in here. All right. And it does show this. It's got return to homepage. And I don't know if that one did say add to favorites. So I'm going to go back and run this program again and take a look at it. That's what we had. So notice I've got here. That's not it. I want to run the program. All right. Let me go back and run the program again. So I'm going to go to my favorite team, NFC North, Green Bay. All right. Now, what it shows in the book, what it showed in the book was that there were going to be a couple buttons here. All right. And there was going to be a button here. We've got return to homepage, which is just fine, but we don't have an add. We don't have an add right here. That might be version 3. I don't remember. All right. But all this does is that. So technically, I'm not doing anything where I'm showing temp data here. All right. So I think that what they show in the book And what they've given us here are two different things, is what I'm telling you. But we'll check that out in a minute. All right, let me back up then to page 314. All right. As it said, thing in here is what we've done in here thus far is we have transferred data from a controller to a view. In fact, in many ways, that's what we've been doing all semester. Sometimes they mention in here, you need to transfer data from one controller to another controller. And one way that you can do that is to use temp data. As it says, temp data is available from controllers and from views. All right. Now, like view data, it uses a dictionary, so it's got key value pairs. All right. So it says, as a result, you have to cast. And again, as a result, you should go and make sure that the value exists. Now, where it differs is right here. It's how long the data persists. Okay. It says with view data, the data persists rather only for the life of the current request. With temp data, the data can persist among multiple requests. Not only that, when you set this up, and you're going to see this very shortly, there's different ways that you can implement this. All right. So it says, in fact, the data here persists until it is read. Once it's read, it's marked as read. All right. And if you say, I don't understand what that is when something is marked in red, the only example that I can give you for this is if you have a variable that you have set up in a program and you have set that variable up and you have initialized it with a value, all right? And then later you don't need the variable anymore. What most programmers will tend to do is to set that variable's value to null. When you do that, the program comes by and it looks at everything, and it for lack of better words, it kind of flags that variable and it says, hey, this is marked as null. I don't think we need it anymore. And it puts like a special something by it, a sticker, whatever you want to say. Then when it checks again, if it still hasn't been used, it gets rid of it. So the idea is similar, though not exactly the same here. All right. But it says at the end of each request, every item that's marked as read is then removed from the temp data directory. All right. Because the items persist, as it says, you can use them in conjunction with this PRG pattern that we just looked at. All right. In the example here on the next page, it says an action method handles a post and redirects to another action method that handles the get, like we did before. It says now, though, the post action wants to verify the user the result of the action. So in other words, imagine this. Imagine that you went out to buy that book. All right. Then with attempt data, you can come up with a message that says your book has now been purchased. That kind of an idea. So you wouldn't feel the need to go back in then, all right, and for lack of better words, kind of, put in that request again, right? Right. And this works because the data in temp data persists after the post request, so it's available to the get. All right. Now, they've got a thing in here that they mentioned on the bottom. All right. They are going to use something in here that it says it uses a razor if statement to see if there's a temp data property that's got a message in it. Again, something like, your cart was now your cart selections have now been purchased or whatever it would be. All right. And to use that, as it says, it uses the keys property of the temp data and the contain method rather of keys. All right. Now, one thing I mentioned to you before, was we talked a little bit about serializing and deserializing. And as it says, by default, temp data can only store data that's been serialized. What that means is temp data can't work on an object. You've got to take the object and work it down into its components. So if an object contains a string and an array or whatever, all right, you can break it down into its individual components and then work with it. As it says, the next chapter, chapter 9, presents a technique that allows you to store complex data types in temp data. So when we get in and we start actually working, all right, when we come in, we start actually working with sessions and cookies and the like, it's easier. I think it's, at least for lack of better words, all right, in my opinion, for whatever that is or is not worth, it's more straightforward to do it that way. All right. So as it says, there's that temp data. All right. And they've set the message there. Okay, when they get back here, they're checking that. If this hasn't been set, if you haven't set this, all right, it's a brand new variable. You won't get an error because it's temp data. But if message has not been set, it'll be null. So there's nothing to print anyway. All right. So this then you want to show it. All right. So as mentioned here, then controllers have a property named temp data to allow you to transfer data to another controller or to a view. This data exists across multiple requests until it is read, as opposed to view data in view bag, which persist until the end of the current request and then they're gone. Temp data, as mentioned here, is often used with the PRG pattern. It can only store data that's serialized. Because temp data is a dictionary, it has a keys property, a values property, and as it says, the keys has a contains, all right, that you can also use. By default, ASP.NET Core 3.0 and later, and we're much later than that, I think we're using 7, automatically enable temp data with the call to add controllers with views. You already know that. We've been using that all semester. Right after that is where we've been adding our use SQL server in that file. All right. How to use methods of the temp data dictionary. Let's look at them and then we'll go back. But there's 3 methods here. All right. There's keep with a key, and there's peek. And what's the difference between them? All right. The big difference between all these is peek. Peek is like a look ahead type of thing. It reads the value with a key, so you know what it is, but it doesn't mark it as read. All right. So it's like you're looking ahead. It's like you're literally taking a peek. All right. And that's where it's from. Now, keep with nothing passed into it, as it says, marks all values in the dictionary as unread, even if everyone has been read already. Keep with a key marks the value associated with a key as unread, but just that value. All right. And why is that important? It all has to go back and do with, do you want something to persist? All right. And if you want it to persist, you're going to end up using peek more often. All right, I'll just tell you that right now. So as it says here, keep has 2 overloads with no arguments. It marks everything in temp data as unread. All right, so as it says, no item is removed at the end of the request. If you pass a key, all right, it marks that as being unread, even if it's been unread. So just that one won't be removed at the end of the request. And for what we're doing, you might think, I sort of get it, but who the hell cares? To be honest with you, with what we're doing in this class, nobody really cares. And what I mean is, this is important if you're putting a boatload of stuff into temp data. If you're not, it's really not that big of an issue, period. All right. So peek, as they say, accepts a key and returns the value for that key, but it doesn't mark it as being read. So it remains in the temp data dictionary. As I already mentioned to you, generally you use peek when you know you don't want to mark something as being read. So the way that you make temp data persist is via the peek method, is what I'm telling you. All right, that's the best way that I can put it. All right, for lack of better words. All right, says if you find that you often need to keep temp data items after you've read them, you probably should use session state instead. Well, they haven't described session state yet. That won't be until the next chapter. All right, which is why we're doing it, for lack of better words. It's kind of why we're doing it the way we're doing it. All right, okay. Let's see. All right, so here's the 2.0, and I thought that was the one I brought up. All right, it may be and it may not be. I just want to go look quickly out on the C drive. And I think that what I did was I went into the student one, then I went into book apps, and these are the two that I've been looking at with you. Chapter 8A, and the new one, or newer one, is chapter 8B. Now, for these solutions, this is supposed to be the end of chapter stuff. In fact, for 8, it's the guitar shop. Right? So as far as I know, the one I'm looking at with you is the one that we do want to look at. But that said, all right, I didn't see everything in there that they showed in the book here, but let's take a look. All right, the next few figures present the updated version. The first screen, as it says, shows the updated Teams app when it first loads. Similar to what you saw before, except again, each logo is a clickable link. All right. And it says you can tell that because when you put your cursor on it, it changes to the hand. That's fine. After the user clicks a team logo, a details page like the one in the second screen is displayed. This page includes an add to favorites button, which you can click to add that to your favorite team. I didn't see that on the one we just went over. I did not see this button. Let's run it again and see if I'm mistaken. Wouldn't be the first time. All right, we should be able to go from this from any place. So I'll just go to AFC and I'll go to West and I'll grab the Denver Broncos and see, like I said, it's not there. I don't see any place where we're going to get temp data here. Like I said, I'm going to keep following the book. We've only got about 7 or 8 pages left in the chapter, but I don't know why there's a discrepancy here between what I have and what the book has. All right. All right. So like I said, you just saw me run it and I did not see 2 buttons there. I just saw a link. All right. So in this version, the team logos are image links. The detail page, at least in the book, has an add to favorites button. And when you click that, they'll show you very shortly what's supposed to happen. And that, well, in fact, I guess the Seattle Seahawks, if you click that one, add it to your favorites. They may have even shown it down here. I don't remember if that was down there or not. Nope. All right, so let's just continue on. So as it says, the first screen allows the home page, shows the home page after the user has added a team to their list of favorites. So the notification method message rather is displayed just below the header. But since it's temp data, you don't want it to persist. So it says the second screen shows the home page after the user has clicked the browser's refresh button. You should notice two things. First, there's no resubmission warning, as they showed earlier in the book, because they've implemented the PRG pattern. Second, that notification message is now gone. It was stored in temp data, so it was removed after it was read. All right. Now, again, when we get into chapter 9, we're actually going to talk about how you're able to store this information. But right now, as they mentioned right here, it doesn't actually store anything. It just displays where it's supposed to display that information. As they mentioned there, it doesn't remember the user's previous conference and division selections. What that means in English is that technically I could keep choosing the same team as my favorite over and over and over again, which is kind of silly. But it does that because there's no state associated with it. So as mentioned here, then in the next chapter, we'll go through what that is and how it works. All right. So again, that's the persisting or semi-persisting. This stays up here until you either make another selection or you refresh the browser. All right, just like that. And again, as already mentioned, this one is utilizing the PRG pattern. Okay. All right, let's finish this up. All right. So the home index view, as it says, displays the team logos. Like what we saw earlier, it uses a for each statement, nothing new there. But what it has to do is it has to make sure that those are now hyperlinked. All right. As it says, each image element is coded within an A tag. The A element uses tag helpers to assign the action method and the ID route, meaning, as it says, these links will send GET requests to the details action method, so it'll bring up the right one. Speaking of which, as mentioned here, all right, it also shows the details action method of the home controller. Notice it starts by creating a team object for the current team. Well, it has to run a Lambda query there to execute to make sure that the right one comes up and a 1 comes up. As it says, it also uses the include method because that information about the conference and the division they're not actually in that table, right? And then the home details view itself, as mentioned right here, says the model object for this view is a team object. Remember, that's what the details section action method for GET request sends to the view. So it's what they mentioned here is it kind of looks the way it has looked. All right, and what you have to do here is shown on page 323. All right. Finally, the chapter ends with they talk about the add method or add action, and they talk about at the bottom the layout view, and that'll be it for the chapter. Okay, so as it says, this method in your favorites is designed to add something to the favorites. And as I mentioned to you, it's fakely adding it because all it's doing is it's populating that message attribute so that it can come out and say that the team has been added, all right, to your favorites. And that's all it's doing. All right. And again, it uses the PRG pattern so we don't have those resubmission errors. The layout they mentioned in here, as it says here, it's similar in most ways to what we looked at before. However, if we look in here, there is an if statement right there. And basically that's saying if there's anything in message, display it. All right. And that's about as simplistic as I can put it right there. All right. So now they say the skills presented in this chapter should provide a solid foundation for transferring data from a controller. but there are other ways to transfer data within the app, and the next 2 chapters show the most useful techniques. So this is a way of doing it, all right? So before we go on, I think it's, I didn't do it yet. I'm not going to lie to you. But when we get done today, I'm going to go over exercise 8.1 here. I asked you to go over 7.1 the other day. I just think it helps you kind of get a gauge on things. All right. But we are not going to go into chapter 9 today, of course. Instead, I'm going to close this for now, and we're going to come over to here, and we're going to look at what's necessary for chapter 8. So, as it says here, we're going to build a trips log app, and it's a little bit different. All right. As it says, it's a data base. It'll use view models to pass data from controllers to views. It'll do a little bit of work with a view bag object, and it'll use temp data. All right. So you can see when we do add something, all right, how it's added using temp data. All right. So in other words, what should come up when we run the program is this. It should show us our list of all the trips we've planned, where we're going, when it starts, when it ends. If we want, we can provide accommodation information, or we can leave it out. We can also provide, if we want, things to do information, or we can leave it out. If we click the add trip button that you see right there, it brings this up. All right. And what's a little confusing here is that once we're adding this stuff and we say we want to go to New York and we want to go and stay at the Ritz and we want it to be on this date from here to here, and we click next, now we're given a second page for this trip log where we're able to add both the phone number and the email address for the destination we had in page 1. Finally, when we click next again, we're on another page. Now, I want you to understand something because it may or may not make sense. I believe that what's mandatory on here is we have to give it a destination and we have to give it a start and an end date. But I believe, again, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. That's the only thing that's required. If we want, after we add that stuff, we can provide information about the accommodations or not. All right, so here we provided nothing and we click next, and notice the last one, the things to do. So it's possible to provide a destination start date and end date, no accommodations, but things to do. Or you can do a destination, a start date and end date, and accommodations and not a thing to do. Or you can do them both as they show right here. So that's basically what it is that we're supposed to build. So if we look in here, this is the way our thing is going to be set up. All right. It says we want to store all the fields for a trip in one table. So we're only going to have one table in here. We're going to actually have 2 view models, but one table. All right. And you'll notice that virtually everything that's in here from the first half on down, all the accommodation stuff, all the things to do stuff, they are all set up to accept nulls. But the destination and the start date and the end date are not set up to accept nulls. So like I said before, that stuff has to be filled in. The other stuff you can leave off if you're so inclined. All right. So let's see. When the app starts, it shows that. Oh, the layout for the app, as it said, should display a banner at the top of the page and a subhead below it. However, as it says, the subhead should only display if there's actual text, all right, in the view data property for it. All right, when you click the add trip link, as it says, the 3-page data entry process starts. All right, and as we mentioned, some of it is mandatory, some of it is optional. So the second page should only display if the user entered a value for the accommodations field on the first page. On this page, the user should enter data about the accommodations. All right. On the third page, it's things to do on your trip, which again is not mandatory. All right. When the user clicks the next button on the first page or second page, the web app should save the data posted from the page into temp data. Then it should use this, as it says, to display in the subheads as needed. So where was it? This was the data. So that's the main head. So is that. This is the subhead that's created using temp data. All right. Hopefully what I just said again made at least some sense. All right. When the user clicks the save button on the third page, the web app should save the data posted from the page and the data in temp data to the database. All right. Then the home page should display a temporary message that the trip has been added. Okay, good. All right. When the user clicks the cancel button on any page, the data should be cleared in the temp data and the whole home page should redisplay. Says you can use this statement to clear the data, temp data.clear. Again, to keep things simple, store all fields for the trip in a single table as shown. So this is what we want to build. All right. This is what we want to build. And when we build that, a new database, we can call it whatever we want. But since this is called my trip log, I plan on calling it trip log. And I believe at least if I take a look in here that I don't have any database, I got one called trips, but I have no trip log. All right. So let's start on this. We'll go for a few minutes and then we'll take another break. All right. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to come back in as I like to do. I'm going to move this stuff over. All right. All of it. And I'm going to put a new folder in here that I'm just going to call trip log. All right. Then I'm going to start up a new session of Visual Basic. Yeah, right. I'm going to set up a new ASP.NET session in here. I'm going to create a new project. It will be, as always, our ASP.NET Core web app model view controller. Again, I'm just going to call this trip log. And I'm going to put it into a folder that's called trip log. And I'm going to keep my project also called trip log. All right. Okay, there's my start. So I'll tell it next. 7.0, we're still not doing any authentication. So I uncheck that and I'm going to click create. You know pretty much the protocol for this now. So I'm going to start by going to tools and NuGet package manager and manage NuGet packages for solution. And I'm going to come in there and go to browse, and into browse, I'm going to put in my Microsoft.Entity Framework Core.Tools, which is here. There it is. So I'm going to add that, click here, choose install, accept, then do it again. But this time I want to add SQL Server. All right, there that is. Again, I'm going to add that or install it, accept. All right, again, because I'm squirrely, I'm going to come back in and do it one more time and verify that they both have been installed, and they have. Okay, so that's my start. All right, I'm just going to go right in right away. I'm going to go into my app settings.json file right away and put this in. Okay. All right, so taking it from the top then, you know this already. We've done this several times. I'm going to add a comma there. Then in here, I'm going to have my connection strings. All right. And over multiple lines here, I'm going to put in, I'll just call it kind of what it is. It's a trip log. So I'm going to call it trip log context. All right. And the same kind of stuff we've been doing. So server equals local DB // MSSQL local DB. Semicolon database equal, again, since I'm using that name all over, I'll again call it trip log. Trusted connection equal true. And our multiple active data, or I'm sorry, multiple active result sets also equal to true. All right. And again, double check my spelling on everything. Connection strings, trip log, context server, local DB, MSSQL, local DB, that all looks good. Database equal trip log, that looks good. Trusted connection equal true, that looks good. Multiple active result sets, that looks good. All right, so I've now got that. I'm just doing it this way to hopefully make it a little easier for me. All right, I'm going to close that. And next, I'm going to go into our program.cs file that's in here. Again, we've done this enough times that hopefully at least what we're about to do in here makes sense to everybody. All right. So what? Right after this, add controllers with views. All right. I'm hoping I can remember at least most of this. I think it's builder.services.add DB context. Then we need to put in the name in here, which we just said was trip log context. Why it's not picking it up, but we'll see if we can figure it out in a second. And then we need options. All right. Options.use SQL server. It's not picking up any of this, which isn't good, but configuration. Configuration dot get connection string. And then in our parens again, trip log context. Now, one of the reasons I'm getting all these errors, all right, one of the reasons is I need my using statement up here where I'm using Microsoft.entity framework. Let's see how much that clears up. So using Microsoft.entity framework core. All right, that got a lot of the errors out of here, not everything. All right, so let's look on here. Doesn't recognize trip log context. Generate that, no. Let's look on here. Does not contain a definition for use SQL server. Does not contain, I believe I'm getting these errors because I have not yet created my file called trip log context. All right, but I believe everything else that's in there, if you look, I believe it's all correct. Builder.services.add DB context, our trip log context, option, lambda operator, options, We don't want this. This is wrong. They should have just said options. All right, like that. Oh, not like that. Boy, oh boy, Chip, put your fingers on the right keys. All right, so options, and that should be options as well. All right, so I'm down to those two errors again, which I think are going to go away. This one, let's see, configuration binder. That's because we don't want configuration binder. We want configuration dot get connection string. So we've got those two errors, builder.services.add DB context, trip log context, options, lambda operator, options.use SQL server. All right. Configuration dot get connection string, then in parens, trip log context. I believe everything that's in there is correct. All right. So I'm going to save all. Hopefully you've been able to keep up with me. Sorry if I'm a little flippant. All right. All right. So we have gone in and we have added our NuGet stuff, our NuGet packages. We did our app settings.json. We did our program.cs. All right. So what should be next, what we're going to do after the break, is we're going to come in and do our models. All right. So it is 2:22. All right. Let's take a shorter break and let's come back at 2:30, please, and we'll pick it up right there. Be right back. All right, sorry about that. I got a phone call during the break. So, all right, let's continue on then. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our models here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a trip.cs. That's going to be our one table that we were told to have in here. So I'm going to add a class. Again, it'll be trip.cs. All right, and start filling it up. It's a little bigger there. There we go. All right. All right, so we'll have a trip ID. Next, we have a required field. Move this over a little bit here. All right, so the destination is required. This will be a string. I got a blank space in there, but I'm going to get rid of it now. There we go. And don't think it'll hurt. I'm going to set it equal to string.empty right away. All right, then we've got another two more fields. They're both going to be date times, and it's going to be when the trip starts and when the trip ends. They're both required as well. And we will initialize this one with a question mark here. No, I just want date time. All right. And I'm going to just copy this because we also need an end date. All right. And then we've got a few more fields, like 6 fields, but with all those fields, all right, none of them are required. All right. So I'm not going to initialize those at all. So hopefully you've got all this stuff so I can keep typing down here. I'm going to have public string accommodate, not public string accommodation. Again, with our get set. And I'm going to copy this twice because next we want an accommodation phone, which will also be a string. And we want an accommodation, come on, get onto there, email, which again will be a string. All right. I think we can put these all equal to string.empty. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. I didn't do that, but it was one of those things that I wrote down later that, that's something that you might want to consider doing. So let me grab this and just copy it over to the other two. That's just the only reason I'm doing that is to get rid of those warnings that come up otherwise. All right. And then I've got a thing to do. And there's 3 of these. So again, I'm going to bring that in here, just copy this down. And there'll be thing to do 2 and thing to do 3. That should be everything to my knowledge. And I don't think I have any warnings or anything yet. Oh, I do. Oh, that's still from the context file. So we'll get rid of those in a minute. All right. So again, there's everything right there. All right. Let me know when you're ready to continue on.
I'm ready to go.
All righty. Let's do the trip log context file next, and we're going to see if we can get rid of those errors that we had. I'm hoping so. So I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to close the trip.cs file. And again, we call this trip log context. So I'm going to come in, and in my models, I'm going to add another class that's going to be trip log context.cs. All right. And we're actually not, we'll set up a DB set, but that said, we're not going to put any data in there because we're allowing the user to plan his or her trip. Hopefully what I just said made sense. We are not expecting that there's any pre-populated data in here. All right, so let's come in here and do this. We will need our using statement up on top here. All right, and that's going to allow us, of course, to do our colon DB context here. All right, we will put in our constructor. All right, you've seen this before, so there's nothing new here. And what doesn't it like? Public context. Must declare a body. Oh, okay. That means I need the two curly braces here. There we go. That fixed that. And this is simple. It's one line. Just our public DB set trip trips and a get set. That's everything we need for that file. Now I'm looking here and it's still giving me errors here. I'm trying to figure out why. Oh, we need our using statement there. Okay, that fixed that error. So we need a using trip log.models. I'm back in my program.cs file and I'm down to this one error. Thought that was correct with what I put in there, but maybe it isn't. Go back and look at it. Thought that was configuration. Let me look at a different program. I'm going to grab this whole thing because this is from one that worked. All right, so I'm going to grab it and just change the name of my context to see if that fixes it. Don't know if it will or not. All right, so that did clear up everything right there. So this now works. I don't know why that is, but sometimes I just have learned that if I copy it in from another program and then just change where I've identified the context, that all of a sudden it starts working. Like I said, I don't know why it is. Sometimes it just is. All right. You have all that?
Yes, and what I had to do was just on line 11 at builder dot before configuration, we just had configuration.
Ah, okay. Gotcha. Okay. All righty. Let's see, I'm going to do a save all and I'm going to close this. All right, I've now got this trip file. That's okay. I can close that as well. But now I've got to make my view model, which is going to be almost incredibly simplistic. So add another class. This will be trip view model.cs. And it's going to be really, really short. Public trip get set and public int page number. And we're needing the page number. So when we are on those things to do, it knows if we're on page 1 or page 2 or page 3. All right. I think if I put a question mark there, that probably will go away. And if I set this equal to 0, initialize that to 0, okay, I believe now I have no errors, and I believe now I have no warnings. There, it's clear, as you can see. All right. So let's do a file save all here, and I'm going to close that. All right, we're making progress. So I'm going to jump right into my, I'm going to need 2 controllers. I'm going to have a home controller and a trip controller. All right, let's start with the home controller because it's there already anyway. So let's open that up. As you've seen me do many times, I'm going to get rid of the diagnostics. I'm going to get rid of everything in here for logging. I'm going to get rid of everything in here for privacy and for this error stuff. Again, like what I like to call is just basically I'm thinning this out in here. So it now looks just like that. We're not done yet, but we've cleaned it up quite a bit. All right, we are going to put about a few lines in here. So we'll put these in. Now, the first one we're going to put in, we don't normally put this into our home controller, but we are, and that is we're going to say private trip log context with a get set. So we're going to put that property in here. Why do you do that? I don't know. All right. And let's see if I put a question mark there, will that, yep, that goes away. All right. I may have to remove some of those question marks later, but I don't think I will. All right. Let's put in the constructor. Seen that many times before. And literally all we're going to want to do in here, 2 things. All right. We're going to want to put a var in here. That's what I want. All right, to list. I don't know what's wrong with that. We'll fix it in a second. And this is going to be trips. All right. Again, that should be var. I hate this IntelliSense sometimes. There. Now, again, I don't know if I need a question mark here for that to go away. No. All that's going to do is give me other errors. It might be here. Hate working with these question marks. There we go. All right. So that is my home controller. All right. Let's go in and let's write the trip controller. All right, which of course we don't have yet. I want to do one thing before that. First, I want to do a file, save all, and close this. But I want to go into my views, and under home, I want to remove the privacy view because I took privacy out of the controller. So I'm going to delete that. All right, now let's put in our trip controller. So under controllers, right mouse click, add controller, MVC controller empty. This again will be trip controller.cs. There it is. All right, just like we did before, we're going to start this with private trip log context, oops, with a get set. And again, I think if I put a question mark here, that'll go away. All right. And then after that, we want to write our constructor again. Okay, not a lot of new what doesn't it like here? Context is not null here. Again, do I need a question mark there too? Nope. Nope. All right. Well, I did not do this like this on mine. I wanted to rewrite it and see if it worked. But the way I wrote it originally was like this, but I used the lambda. So let's see if it takes the lambda stuff. It's just another way of writing the same thing. Still is giving me an error. Did I call it up here? Context CTX. Oh, that should be trip log context here. That's why I got the error. So you can write it either like this or the way I'm just more the old school where I do it like this. Either way will work. My ways are probably a little more typing, but I think it's a little more self-descriptive. So that's why I like doing it like that, but you can do it either way. All right. Now for our index here, instead of returning a view like this, all right, I don't even want an iAction result in here. I want to redirect to action result index. All right, then in here, I want a redirect to action, and I want to go to the index of my home controller. What does that like? Not all code paths return a value. I don't know. Do I have to say return here? Maybe I do. There we go. And again, just so you're aware of it, I'm trying to be more consistent here. This could also be written like this. So I could have done this. and then removed all of this. Notice there's no error. So if you prefer that syntax, the lambda syntax, then do it that way. In fact, why don't I just be consistent and I'll do both of those like this. All right. It does result in a little less code, but it's mainly just because we're putting things on one line. All right. So we've got that. We will need an add method in here. And that will actually be, we will need a get for that. We will take that and default it to having no ID. All right, we're getting that error now because we're not returning anything. All right, this is going to be a little bit of typing, so you've been warned. And actually, we've got about 100 more lines in here to key in. All right, once we get done with that, we've got to fix our layout and our index.cshtml and our, we will have an add 1.cshtml, an add 2.cshtml, and an add 3.cshtml. As far as I'm concerned, if right now we can get done with writing this, so we've got our controllers done, that's good for today. All right, we can pick it up tomorrow, and over a half an hour or so, we can finish this up and bop right into chapter 9. All right. So we are going to actually instantiate a new trip view model right here. VM is just for view model, call it whatever you want. Now, we need to pass the accommodation value or the destination value. And remember, if you say, I don't understand, going back to here, we have to either pass the accommodation thing or the destination thing, depending on what we're working with to the view. Remember, accommodation is an optional value. All right. You don't need it to persist after it's read in. All right, we can make it null. So we'll do a straight read here. If it's not null, we'll use keep to make sure that it persists. I'm sorry. Destination is a required value. We always need it to persist after it's read. So for that one, we will use the peek method. Just again, to review what we talked about before the break, whoops. We want to make sure that if something persists and possibly for a long, long time, we're going to use the peek method. All right. So we have to check to see what page we're on in here. We're either on page 1. So again, that's page 1. That's page 2. That's page 3. The only thing we must, or what we must provide in here is well, let's go back and look. All right. So the destination is required. The start date and the end date are required. So as far as what's on page 1 there, we have to fill in this and we have to fill in these. This is not required, the accommodations. If we do fill in something else and we click next, then it's expected we'll put something in there. All right. If we don't put anything in there, of course, this would be moot, but we'd still click next if we want to add things to do. What I'm trying to show you is the natural progression here. We are going to be on here eventually, either page 1 or page 2 or page 3. All right. And the way that we're going to check this, whoops, is we're going to come in here and we're going to start by checking to see if we are on page 2. So let me close this again. All right. So if ID dot to lower equal page 2, so if that's where we are, and of course that's a string. All right, so if we're on page 2, we're going to set up an accommodation. That should have been a parenthesis. I apologize. If there's nothing in there, we can skip the page. So we can skip to page 3. Oh my goodness. Let's see. All right, we'll put it on the same line. Doesn't like it on multiple lines, so. All right, what doesn't it like here? Return view. I don't know how I got a VM in there, but I did. There we go. All right, so this is if it's empty. All right, and again, something in here probably needs a question mark. All right, well, I got rid of one of them, but it added another error. So I'm going to just leave it in there and I'll worry about, trying to figure out the question marks later. All right, if it wasn't empty, so we need an else in here. Then I'm on page 2. All right, so this is all meant to handle if I'm on that second page. So everything that's in here is going to handle if I'm on that second page. All right. Taking it from the top. Again, if the ID is page 2, so if what was passed in right there was page 2, all right, then in temp data, I'm going to have the name of the accommodation, but I have to convert it to a string. All right, after I do that, I have to see whether or not that accommodation is null or empty. If it is null or empty, there's nothing else to do. So I can go to page 3. I need to know what my destination is, so I need to keep that, or with a peak. All right, and now I can set up a new trip and I can return by moving to page 3. If there was something in page 2, that's the else, then I've got to fill up the accommodation information. All right, and again, in the other one, I'm using a peak, and here I'm using a keep with that accommodation information. And I have to return that I was on add to, and it worked. So that's everything right up to there for page 2. So I'm going to come in here and say else if id.toLower equal page 3. So now if I'm on the last page, all right, page number is 3. This is a little long, but it is. There won't be enough room, I don't think, to write it on here. It's going to fly off the page. So we're after peak here. All right, I'm going to go and continue on to the next line. Whoops, like that. Again, somewhere in here, it must be where I need to have a new or an underline or something. So let me look. VM.trip equal new trip, destination equal temp data dot peak, name of trip dot destination dot toString. All right, doesn't like something here. Semicolon expected. There is one right here. Not trip. Oh, I didn't have an equal sign there. I'm sorry. There we go. All right. And again, like I said, I'm going to have to look because these are all null reference things. So something in here needs a question mark. Notice when I fix that, now I get one here. All right. So it doesn't like that. Doesn't like it there. And like I said, it's just after a while, you're just playing around with these things. All right. All right. And I want to again return here. All right. Finally, if it's not page 2 and it's not page 3, I'm on page 1. And that is everything. So like I said, right now, it looks like I've got about 3 things in here for possible null reference. Everything else looks like it's good, looks like it's working at least. Then we have to do our post, which is going to be about as long as this one was. And then we have to redirect in case we're doing a cancel. All right. So we're about halfway through this right now. Like I said, I'll go till about 3:30. Hopefully we can finish it by then. All right. So hopefully, I mean, do you need me to show you anything else? Are you keeping up?
I think I'm keeping up. I've got that error that you just fixed over that curly that I'm trying to.
Well, one thing is over here, I didn't have an equal sign for that trip. I didn't have that equal sign.
I got that. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
These are all just the possible null reference. So I'm going to look at those later and see if I can figure that out. But now
Okay.
I need to put in, you still have an error?
No, yeah, I was just saying I don't have any errors anymore. Just those
Okay.
couple
So now we do our post. All right. And like I said, this is about as long as the other one was. So. We want to store our data in temp data and then redirect using the PRG. So. All right, and I'm going to copy this line so I've got it in here 4 times, then make changes to it. Finally, there'll be a return here, so I'll fix all that in just a moment. All right, let's fix this. So this is accommodation. So is this. This is start date. As is this. And this is end date. As is this. All right. So if it's page 1, all right, we're basically throwing all the stuff from that's being held in our view model into temp data. All right. And we are redirecting them then to page 2. And of course, being me, could I do this without screwing it up? Probably not. We have to validate our data. So if model state dot is valid. There we go. So that's if it worked. So model state is valid. We need an else in here if we somehow screwed it up. And if that's the case, we want to return a view, add 1 view model. So that handles page 1. Now we have to handle page 2 and page 3. All right. This had the most stuff in it. So again, what we're doing here is we're grabbing everything that we are that we have set up. All right. And this is everything on page 1 that we need to save. Then we're redirecting them to page 2. Right there. Otherwise, we're just going to keep them where they were. All right. So else, if VM.page number equal to, all right, then we want to store our data in temp data and again redirect. So I'm going to grab this line of code because that's pretty much what we want to do here. All right, so temp data, name trip accommodation, vm.trip.accommodation. And the other thing, actually what was in there was not that, but it was phone and email. Accommodation. Trip.accommodation. Phone. I don't think that's right. Well, we'll fix it in a minute. All right. Let's look at this. Trip. We do have an accommodation phone. And we've got an accommodation email. All right. All right. Then, just like we're doing here, we have to add that, and then we have to move on to page 3. All right, so that'll handle page 1, and that'll handle page 2. All right. Now we have to do some work for page 3. All right. And then after we do this, we got maybe 10 more lines and then we're done. All right, so we don't need data in temp data to persist. We can do a straight read. All right, what do I mean? Let me put all this stuff in here. We got about 6 lines here. And again, not that I have to do this, but I'm going to copy these and then modify it. All right. I thought that would clear that up, but it didn't. All right. What happened there, but something did. All right, I got to clean this up now because that's it. See what I did wrong here. Temp data name of trip destination to string. That looks good. Accommodation. Temp data name of trip. Accommodation. String. That looks good. This is start date. That's why I'm getting that error. And this is end date. Again, I've got a whole bunch of possible nulls in here, okay? And that's why I'm getting all that goofy stuff that I'm getting in here. All right, this is where we're finally want to be able to go in and write our stuff to our database. Me and Nelson here for somehow we're not on page 1 or page 2 or page 3. We just want to return, period. All right, now we've got our cancel, which is 5 lines long, and then we're finished for the day. Like I said, if I have time, I'll look tomorrow in here and play with all these things in here. I don't know if I put question mark there. See, I got to figure out where we have to put the question marks. Okay. So the last thing to do in here is our cancel. That's everything. Now, I just want to check in here. So you'll notice there's a heck of a lot of possible null references, but they're all warnings. So everything we put in here so far does work. So like I said, it is now 3:25 and my head's just spinning a little bit here. I want to go and do the layout and I want to do our home CSHTML and I want to do the for the trip model, I want to do the page 1 and the page 2 and the page 3. Now, if we really humped it, we probably could do it by the end of class. But what I'd like to do is between now and tomorrow, see if I can get rid of some of these warnings that are in here. So I'm going to save what I have. I'm not even going to run it because we have done nothing with our underscore layout file. We've done nothing with our home.cshtml. So it's just going to look like a typical ugly, brand new program right now. All right. Were you able to catch up to me?
Yeah, I think I've got what you have.
All right. So like I said, tomorrow when we start, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to come in and take a quick look at the underscore layout.cshtml and see if anything in there must be rewritten. I'm sure there's going to be something either rewritten or added. Then we'll go into home and we'll rewrite that. And then we will go in, and we haven't added it yet, but we will add in views, we'll add a new folder for our trip, and we'll have a page 1.cs HTML, a page 2.cs HTML, and a page 3. In fact, I'm going to add those now. So in views, I'm going to add a new folder that I'm going to call trip. And in that new folder, I'm going to add 3 files, which will now all be empty. So I'm going to add a Razor View empty that's going to be called page 1.cs HTML. Again, I'll leave it empty, other than I'll clear out all that garbage that's in it. And then I will have a page 2.cs HTML, and again, clear out all the garbage that's in it. And finally, a page 3.cs HTML. All right, I think that we made a lot of progress today. Hopefully you agree. So for tomorrow, we'll finish this up in about the first hour, just in case we have any problems getting it to run. And then we're going to jump right into chapter 9, where we're going to talk about sessions and cookies, and we're going to see a couple new versions of this NFL app. All right. Okay, that's all I've got for today. Have a good rest of the day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.